Hi, my name's Phil. I'd like to talk about politics. So, with all the different ways in which Trump is acting to weaken the US economy, if his brain wasn't so full of worms, you'd think he was doing it deliberately to destroy the economic system which allowed an idiot like him to live a life of extreme luxury, gold bogs and everything. Because a few days ago, Donald Trump fired the head of the Bureau of Labour Statistics because he didn't like the Labour statistics. He claims the official statistics have been rigged to make him look bad. The reality, however, is that he wants the Bureau to rig the data to make him look good, in conjunction with his desire to install compliant members of the Federal Reserve next year. What are the dangers for the US and global economy of Donald Trump setting in motion a chain of events which causes investors to question the accuracy of US economic data over the next few years? But first, for daily news and politics, please click the subscribe button, stay notified. So, as we've discussed so many times before, on the subject of Brexit, trust and stability is absolutely vital for businesses to operate. Without it, people do not have the confidence to invest in your economy. And although there are plenty of gamblers putting money into the stock market, those who do it reliably do so on the basis of knowing everything about the companies and the market they are investing in. Create doubt about the data, and investment becomes a gamble for those who are not really interested in gambling, which means that the returns have to be very, very tempting. After a recent jobs report highlighted that jobs growth was still positive, but well down on expectations, and earlier months' data was revised downwards, Donald Trump threw into a bit of a rage and renewed his attacks on the integrity of core economic data. His actions have sent a bit of a tremor through the financial world, leading a lot to ask a question. Could this be the spark that ignites the next financial crisis? All starts with a set of numbers that were a disaster, but they didn't quite fit the political narrative. The Bureau of Labour Statistics, or BLS, released its latest jobs report. The data showed that jobs growth, it picked up in the second quarter of 2025, stable unemployment rate of 4.1%, numbers that by historical standards are all right. For Donald Trump, however, the problem wasn't the economy, it was the data. He claimed the numbers, while seemingly okay, were phony and manipulated. Now, that's not a new tactic for him, of course, but he's taken it a step further, because in a move that has actually had economists and Republicans alike going, what the hell, man? Trump accused the agency of fabricating bad news and then took the fairly unprecedented step of firing its commissioner. This is not a political appointee. The BLS is designed to be an independent agency, shielded from political pressure for good reason. Statisticians are career civil servants. They're not political appointments. Their only job is to provide objective, untainted data that everyone from the Federal Reserve to Wall Street to foreign investors can rely on. So by firing the head of the agency for producing numbers he didn't like, because despite what he says, everyone knows it's just because he doesn't like the numbers, Trump has turned a trusted institution into a political football. And that creates a bit of a toxic mix of uncertainty. Because if you can't trust the official data, what can you trust? This single act has thrown the very idea of economic reality into question. And in finance, uncertainty is the enemy of stability, because think about what happens now. So there'll have to be a new head of the Bureau, right? So after a few months, some more data starts to come out. Will investors believe it? How will they know that the new head of the Bureau won't be buckling under political pressure to massage the figures? They'll have no idea. And to understand why it's so dangerous, you have to look at how the global financial system sort of operates. It's not gut feelings and risky bets. There are people who do that. But mostly it's a system built on an absolute mountain of data. Every day you've got trillions of dollars moving around the world based on economic indicators like the jobs report. Serious investors, full-time investors who know what they're doing, they're poring over data like this all the time. That data tells investors where to put their money, businesses when to hire, and the Federal Reserve how to set interest rates to keep the economy on track. The foundation of the entire system is the belief that the data is real and free from political meddling. For decades, the BLS has been a bit of a gold standard. Its independence, very, very valuable asset for investors. But repeated claims that its work is being manipulated, that's going to chip away at that trust. When investors, businesses, and the public start to doubt key economic numbers, it's much harder to know how healthy the economy really is. And when people are worried about the health of the economy, what happens? They become a bit more cautious, risk averse. You're forcing markets to guess, and guessing leads to volatility. And this is all happening as other questionable policies are making markets anxious as well. You've got the government's use of tariffs, for example. That's a huge source of instability. The world is taking notice here. We've seen volatility in the US dollar, while safe haven assets like gold have gotten more attention. That is always a clear signal of shaky confidence in the economy when people go to gold, because gold sort of holds its value. You're not going to make anything out of it, but you're not going to lose. Former officials from the International Monetary Fund have warned about this. They've pointed to a mixture of different soaring fiscal deficits, unpredictable trade policy, now a completely open disregard for trusted data. The attack on the BLS, it's not happening in a vacuum. It's part of a broader pattern that is chipping away at the credibility of the United States economy. You would think the thing that Trump wants to boost. Which brings us back to the central question here. Could this behaviour actually set off a full-blown financial crisis? Because while the rhetoric alone won't cause a market to collapse, what you're seeing is a dangerous mix of factors that could create that perfect storm. Think about what happens when trust completely disappears. If markets can't rely on official stats, they start pricing in the political risk premium. Discussed this concept before. It's why bond yields go up if the government adopts policies which look like debt management might sail a bit close to the wind. If investors think the government has a margin for error that's a bit too small on managing that debt, they need higher returns to tempt them, because those investments are over like 5 or 10 years. But investors in the stock market have got the same approach to investors in bond markets. They want a return. They're just making money, right? And they want a good return. The riskier the investment, the better return they need, so that they can be confident their portfolio is solid. You accept a few losses, but overall you need to win. But with Trump's interventions, they may assume the numbers are unreliable at best and manipulated at worst. Like I say, it doesn't matter if the next head of the bureau is as straight as a die and they produce accurate numbers and Trump just moans about them again. How do you know? What if they post some decent figures at some point in the future? How do you know that those are the real figures and not just that Trump's been leaning on them? So in response, investors are going to demand higher returns to compensate for this uncertainty. They may start selling off US assets or moving their money to countries with more stable institutions. This can create a self-fulfilling prophecy where a slow trickle of capital leaves the country, turns into a flood, causing asset prices to drop, credit markets to freeze. This fire is being fed by other fuel as well. You've got the government's general push for deregulation in the financial sector. That's got economists worried about a riskier environment where unchecked speculation could grow. Talks last week about how the tariffs alone, just the tariffs alone, if you didn't have any of the rest of it, could on their own trigger a major financial crisis. But you combine this with unreliable data, or at least potentially unbelievable data, unpredictable policymaking, you've got a recipe for disaster. And it's not just like a Wall Street problem, right? The real world consequences are surveys are showing that a majority of Americans are worried about a possible recession. Of course you would be. It's been constantly talked about. And it's fairly obvious what the triggers could be. So they're pointing to the government's policies as a source of rising prices, because it's definitely triggering inflation. How can you not go from about an average of 2.5% tariffs to 18% tariffs and not trigger inflation, as well as financial insecurity? Now, when people see chaos and dishonesty at the top, that shakes their confidence. So what happens is they'll spend less. They might put off, buying a car or something like that. They may save because they think to themselves, well, what if my job's at risk, or what if my income's at risk? Let's just cut back a bit on things we don't really need. And that kind of behaviour, you multiply that across millions of households, that can be the very thing that pushes a slowing economy into recession. The biggest danger of a recession, arguably, is not that it represents lots of people having lost their jobs. That's what causes it, right? Something happens, you don't get as many people in work, so they're not spending as much, which means other businesses then shed them. The thing that causes the real problem in a recession is that everyone else who might be fine, There'll be plenty of people in the country who, do you know what? They're fine. But because they're not sure they're fine, they'll start saving instead of spending. That creates a domino effect whereby even less money is now being cycled around the economy. So businesses have to cut back. That means even more job losses, which means even more cutting back from people. And of course, lower taxes paid on income and profits. And this doom loop establishes itself. You know, the government's most important job, really, when it comes to the economy, is to instill confidence in the economy. And, you know, we have to remember back at the banking crisis, really the problem with the banking crisis was fundamentally not that people took on all these toxic loans, these toxic debts, although that was not wise. The problem, the thing that triggered the banking crisis, someone looked at them. Someone looked at them while they were not looking at what was in the box. What's in this box? Oh, a load of debts. It's fine. Yeah, great. While that was happening, people were happily trading them. There was no problem. The problem was someone bought one of these boxes and went, well, I'm going to have a look at this. Holy shit, what's in here? There's nothing. That was what caused the problem. Confidence is basically what glues the economy together. I said last autumn, I thought our Labour government was mad to talk down the economy. In opposition, sure, it's what you do. In government, no, you should be talking up, hyping up all the brilliant things you're going to do. It knocked consumer confidence. We saw it falling in real term, partially contributing to the worsening figures which kept forcing Reeves to have to plug holes in a budget because she's getting people worried about the economy. When you're worried about the economy, you don't spend as much. When you don't spend as much, then productivity goes down. It's madness. Trump's tariffs have been the major factor in the UK for that, admittedly, but we had low consumer confidence last winter, and that predates Trump. What Trump is doing is undermining trust in the US economy, which will make people worry about their own futures and cut back rather than spend. And it's not just calling into question the jobs data. Trump is also trying to pressure the Federal Reserve into cutting interest rates. They are holding firm, but terms are ending next year. What if Trump is able to jam people into key positions who will do whatever he wants them to do? You know, that could trigger massive levels of inflation. Trump has already slapped massive tariffs on goods for businesses and consumers alike with his tariffs. He's cut funding for the vital infrastructure which many businesses need. He's weakened the dollar, making the cost of imports even higher. He's also scared off investors with unreliable data. And he wants to stoke inflation with politically motivated interest rate cuts. So what then? The situation could spiral out of control. And the contagion would then spread around the world because the health of the American market frequently determines the health of the global market. So will Trump's war on data spark the next financial crisis? We are in uncharted territory here. No government has been quite this stupid. And there have been some stupid governments in the past. You know, history teaches us a single event doesn't usually cause a crash. It's the slow, steady chipping away at institutions, creating chaos, destroying trust that makes a crisis inevitable. Because our economy doesn't really exist. It's an Excel spreadsheet. The entire world economy is an Excel spreadsheet. So it's confidence in that system that allows it to work. You chip away at that confidence, all of a sudden it doesn't work. So the combination of misleading rhetoric, unpredictable trade policy, direct assault on the integrity of America's economic data creates a fragility that the market hasn't really seen in decades. You know, experts, even Republicans in Congress, are warning that these are the kind of conditions that can lead to a financial spiral. You know, probably won't happen tomorrow, but the foundation is cracking. It could easily happen in the next year or two. You know, we're in the wait and see phase at the moment. Wait and see, can confidence be maintained in the system whilst the US president is actively seeking to undermine that confidence? But, you know, the stability we take for granted for years at a time is at the moment hanging by a thread. And that thread is being pulled apart by the American government, who are trying to protect it. But let me know what you think in the comments below. For more content, you could subscribe to the channel or even join for access to streams and behind the scenes updates. Thanks for watching, and until next time, I'll see you later.